Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's Smiles here, and we're here with part two of chapter one of Life and Death Twilight Reimagined by Stephanie Meyer. So let's quickly just jump in here. So, this is a lot different than Phoenix, huh? She said. Very. It doesn't rain much there, does it? 3 or 4 times a year? Wow. What must that be like? She wondered. Sunny, I told her. You don't look very tan. My mother is part albino. She studied my face uneasily, and I stifled a groan. It looked like clouds and a sense of humor didn't mix. A few months of this and I'd forget how to use sarcasm. We walked back around the cafeteria to the south buildings by the gym. Erica followed me right to the door, though it was clearly marked. Well, good luck, she said as I touched the handle. Maybe we'll have some other classes together. She sounded hopeful. I smiled at her in what I hoped was not an encouraging way, and went inside. The rest of the morning passed in about the same way. My trigonometry teacher, Ms. Varner, who I would have disliked anyway just because of the subject she taught, was the only one who made me stand in front of the class and introduce myself. I stammered, went splotchy red, and tripped over my own boots on the way to my seat. After 2 classes, I started to recognize some of the faces in each room. There was always someone braver than the others who would introduce themselves and ask me questions about how I was liking forks. I tried to be diplomatic, but mostly I just lied a lot. At least I never needed the map. In every class, the teacher started out calling me Beaufort, and though I corrected them immediately, it was depressing. It had taken me years to live down Beaufort. Thank you so much, Grandpa, for dying just months before I was born and making my mom feel obligated to honor you. No one at home even remembered that Beau was just a nickname anymore. Now, I had to start all over again. One guy sat next to me in both Trig and Spanish, and he walked with me to the cafeteria for lunch. He was short, not even up to my shoulder, but his crazy curly hair made up some of the difference between our heights. I couldn't remember his name, so I smiled and nodded as he rattled on about teachers and classes. I didn't try to keep up. We sat at the end of a full table with several of his friends, who he introduced me to. Couldn't complain about the manners here. I forgot all their names as soon as he said them. They seemed to think it was cool he invited me. The girl from English, Erica, waved at me from across the room, and they all laughed. Already the butt of the joke. It was probably a new record for me. But none of them seemed mean-spirited about it. It was there, sitting in the lunchroom, trying to make conversation with 7 curious strangers, that I first saw them. They were seated in the corner of the cafeteria, as far away from where I sat as possible in the long room. There were 5 of them. They weren't talking, and they weren't eating, though they each had a tray of food in front of them. They weren't gawking at me, unlike most of the other students, so it was safe to stare at them. But it was none of these things that caught my attention. They didn't look anything alike. There were 3 girls. One I could tell was super tall, even sitting down. Maybe as tall as I was? Her legs went on forever. She looked like she might be the captain of the volleyball team, and I was pretty sure you wouldn't want to get in the way of one of her spikes. She had dark, curly hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Another had the hair color of honey hanging to her shoulders. She was not quite so tall as the brunette, but still probably taller than most of the guys at the table. There was something intense about her. Edgy. It was kind of weird, but for some reason she made me think of this actress I'd seen in an action movie a few weeks ago, who took down a dozen guys with a machete. I remembered thinking that I didn't buy it. There was no way the actress could actually take on that many bad guys in one. But I thought now that I might have bought it if the character had been played by this girl. The last girl was smaller. Her hair somewhere between red and brown, but different than either. Kind of metallic somehow. A bronzy color. She looked younger than the other two, who could have easily been in college. The 2 guys were opposites. The taller one, who was definitely taller than me, I guess 6'5", or even more, was clearly the school star athlete and the prom king and the guy who always had dibs on whatever equipment he wanted in the weight room. His straight gold hair was wound into a bun on the back of his head, but there was nothing feminine about it. Somehow it made him look even more like a man. He was clearly too cool for this school, or any other I could imagine. The shorter guy was wiry. His dark hair buzzed so short it was just a shadow across his scalp. Totally different, and yet they were all alike. Every one of them was chalky pale, the palest of all the students living in this sunless town. Paler than me, the albino. They all had dark eyes. From here they looked black, despite the range in their hair colors. There were deep shadows under all their eyes. Purple shadows like bruises. Maybe the 5 of them had just pulled an all-nighter. Or maybe they were recovering from broken noses. Except that their noses, all their features, were straight, angular. But that wasn't why I couldn't look away. I stared because their faces, so different, so similar, were insanely, inhumanly beautiful. The girls and the guys both. Beautiful. They were faces you never saw in real life, just airbrushed in magazines and on billboards, or in a museum painted by an old master as the face of an angel. It was hard to believe they were real. I decided the most beautiful of all was the bronze-colored hair. The smaller girl with the bronze-colored hair, though I expected the female half of the student body would vote for the movie star blonde guy. They would be wrong, though. I mean, all of them were gorgeous, but the girl was something more than just beautiful. She was absolutely perfect. It was an upsetting, disturbing kind of perfection. It made my stomach uneasy. They were all looking away from each other, away from the rest of the students, away from anything in particular as far as I could tell. It reminded me of models posed oh so artistically for an ad. aesthetic Inuit. As I watched, the wiry skinhead guy rose with his tray, unopened soda, untouched apple, and walked away with a quick and graceful lope that belonged on a runway. I wondered if they had a dance company here in town, until he dumped his tray and glided through the back door faster than I would have thought possible. My eyes darted back to the others, who hadn't changed. Who are they? I asked the guy from my Spanish class, whose name I'd forgotten. As he looked up to see who I meant, though he could probably guess from my tone. Suddenly she looked at us, the perfect one. She looked at my neighbor for just a fraction of a second, and then her dark eyes flickered to mine. Long eyes, angled up at the corners, thick lashes. She looked away quickly, faster than I could, though I dropped my stare as soon as she glanced our way. I could feel the patches of red start to bloom in my face. In that brief flash of a glance, her face wasn't interested at all. It was like he had called her name, and she'd looked up as an involuntary response, already having decided not to answer. My neighbor laughed once, uncomfortable and looking down at the table like I did. He muttered his answer under his breath. Those are the Cullens and the Hales. Edith and Eleanor Cullen, Jessamine and Royal Hale. The one who left was Archie. They live with Dr. Cullen and her husband. I glanced sideways at the perfect girl who was looking at her tray now, picking a bagel to pieces with thin, pale fingers. Her mouth was moving very quickly, her full lips barely opening. The other three looked away, but I still thought she might be speaking quietly to them. Weird names. Old-fashioned. The kind of names grandparents had, like my name. Maybe that was the thing here. Small town names. And then I finally remembered that my neighbor was named Jeremy. A totally normal name. There were 2 kids named Jeremy in my history class back home. They're all very good looking. What an understatement. Yeah, Jeremy agreed with another laugh. They're all together, though. Royal and Eleanor, Archie and Jasmine. Like, dating, you know? And they live together. He snickered and wagged his eyebrow suggestively. I didn't know why, but his reaction made me want to defend them. Maybe just because he sounded so judgmental, but what could I say? I didn't know anything about them. Which one are the Cullens? I asked, wanting to change the tone but not the subject. They don't look related. Well, I mean, sort of. Oh, they're not. Dr. Cullen is really young, early 30s. The Cullen kids are all adopted. The Hales, the blondes, are brother and sister, twins, I think. And they're some kind of foster kids. They look old for foster kids. They are now. Royal and Jasmine are both 18, but they've been with Mr. Cullen since they were little. He's their uncle, I think. That's actually kind of amazing For them to take care of all those kids? And they're so young and everything? I guess so, Jeremy said, though it sounded like he'd rather not say anything positive. As if he didn't like the doctor and her husband for some reason. And the way he was looking at their adopted kids. I could guess there might be some kind of jealousy involved. I think Dr. Cullen can't have kids, though, he added, as if that somehow made what they were doing less admirable. Through all this conversation, I couldn't keep my eyes away from the strange family for more than a few seconds at a time. They continued to look at the walls and not eat. Have they always lived in Forks? I asked. How could I have never noticed them during my summers here? No, they just moved down 2 years ago from somewhere in Alaska. I felt a strange wave of pity and relief. Pity because, as beautiful as they were still outsiders, not accepted. Relief that I wasn't the only newcomer, and definitely not the most interesting by any standard. As I examined them again, the perfect girl, one of the Cullens, looked up and met my gaze, this time with obvious curiosity. I immediately looked away. I thought that her look held some kind of unanswered expectation. Which one is the girl with the reddish-brown hair? I asked. I tried to glance casually in that direction, like I was just checking out the cafeteria. She was still staring at me, but not gawking like the other kids had today. She had this frustrating expression I didn't understand. I looked down again. That's Edith. She's hot, sure, but don't waste your time. She doesn't go out with anyone. Apparently none of the guys here are good enough for her, Jeremy said sourly, then grunted. I wondered how many times she turned him down. I pressed my lips together to hide a smile, then glanced at her. Edith. Her face was turned away, but I thought from the shape of her cheek that she might be smiling too. A few more minutes, the four of them left the table together. They were all seriously graceful, even the golden prom king. It was strange to watch them in motion together. Edith didn't look at me again. I sat at the table with Jeremy and his friends longer than I would have if I'd been sitting alone. I didn't want to be late for class on my first day. One of my new acquaintances, who'd politely reminded me that his name was Alan, had biology, too, with me the next hour. We walked to class together in silence. He was probably shy like me. When we entered the classroom, Alan went to sit at a black-top table, exactly like the ones I was used to at home. He already had a neighbor. In fact, all the tables were filled, but one. Next to the center aisle, I recognized Edith Cullen by her unusual metallic hair sitting next to that single open seat. My heart started pounding a little faster than usual. As I walked down the aisle to do my required intro for the teacher and get my slip signed, I was watching her, trying to make it covert. Just as I passed, she suddenly went rigid in her seat. Her face jerked up toward mine so fast it surprised me, staring with the strangest expression. It was more than angry. It was furious, hostile. I looked away stunned, going red again. I stumbled over a book in the walkway and had to catch myself on the edge of a table. The girl sitting there giggled. I'd been right about the eyes. They were black. Coal black. Mrs. Banner signed my slip and handed me a book with no nonsense about introductions and no mention of my full name. I could tell we were going to get along. Of course, she had no choice but to send me to the one open seat in the middle of the room. I kept my eyes down as I went to sit by her, confused and awkward, wondering what I could have done to earn the antagonistic glare she'd given me. I didn't look up as I set my book on the table and took my seat, but I saw her posture change from the corner of my eye. She was leaning away from me, sitting on the extreme edge of her chair and averting her face like she smelled something bad. Inconspicuously, I sniffed. My shirt smelled like the laundry detergent I had used. How could that be offensive? I scooted my chair to the right, giving her as much space as I could, and tried to pay attention to the teacher. The lecture was on cellular anatomy, something I'd already studied. I took notes carefully anyway, always looking down. I couldn't stop myself from shooting the occasional glance at the strange girl next to me. Throughout the entire class, she never relaxed her stiff position at the edge of her chair, sitting as far away from me as possible, with her hair hiding most of her face. Her hand was clenched into a fist on top of her left thigh, tendons standing out under her pale skin. This, too, she never relaxed. She never had the sleeves of her white Henley pushed up to her elbows and her forearm flexed with surprisingly hard muscle beneath her pale skin. I couldn't help but notice how perfect that skin was. Not one freckle. Not one scar. The class seemed to drag on longer than the rest. Was it because the day was finally ending, or because I was waiting for her tight fist to loosen? It never did. She continued to sit so still it looked like she wasn't even breathing. What was wrong with her? Was this how she usually acted? I questioned my quick judgment on Jeremy's sour grapes at lunch today. Maybe he wasn't resentful. This couldn't have anything to do with me. She didn't know me from Adam. Mrs. Banner passed some quizzes back when the class was almost done. She handed me one to give to the girl. I glanced at the top automatically. 100%. And I'd been spelling her name wrong in my head. It was Edythe, not Edith. I'd never seen it spelt that way before, but it fit her better. I glanced down at her as I slid the paper over and then instantly regretted it. She was glaring up at me again, her long black eyes full of revulsion. As I flinched away from the hate radiating from her, the phrase, "if looks could kill," suddenly ran through my mind. At that moment, the bell rang loudly, making me jump. Edith Cullen was already out of her seat. She moved like a dancer, every perfect line of her slim body in harmony with all the others. Her back to me, and she was out the door before anyone else was out of their seat. I sat frozen in my seat, staring blankly after her. She was so harsh. I began gathering up my things slowly, trying to block out the confusion and guilt that filled me. Why should I feel guilty? I hadn't done anything wrong. How could I have? I hadn't actually even met her. Are you Beaufort Swan? A female voice asked. I looked up to see a cute baby-faced girl. Her hair carefully flat-ironed into a pale blonde curtain. Smiling at me in a friendly way, she obviously didn't think I smelled bad. Beau, I corrected her, smiling back. I'm Michaela. Hi, Michaela. Do you need any help finding your next class? I'm heading to the gym, actually. I think I can find it. Oh, that's my next class, too. She seemed thrilled, though it was such a big coincidence in a school this small. We walked to class together. She was a chatterer. She supplied most of the conversation, which made it easy for me. She lived in California till she was 10, so she got how I felt about the sun. It turned out she'd been in my English class also. She was the nicest person I'd met today. But as we were entering the gym, she asked, So, did you stab Edith Cullen with a pencil or what? I've never seen her act like that. I winced. I guess I wasn't the only one who had noticed. And apparently that wasn't Edith Cullen's usual behavior. I decided to play dumb. Was that the girl I sat next to in biology? Yeah, she said. She looked like she was in pain or something. I don't know, I responded. I never spoke to her. She's weird. Michaela lingered by me instead of heading to the dressing room. If I got to sit by you, I would have talked to you. I smiled at her before walking through the boys' locker room door. She was kind and seemed to like me, but that wasn't enough to make me forget the last strange hour. The gym teacher, Coach Clapp, found me a uniform, but she still didn't dress me down for today's class. At home, only 2 years of PE were required. Here, PE was mandatory, all 4 years. My own special version of hell. I watched 4 volleyball games running simultaneously, remembering how many injuries I had sustained and inflicted playing volleyball. I felt a little nauseated. The final bell rang at last. I walked slowly to the office to return my paperwork. The rain had faded away, but the wind was strong and colder. I zipped my jacket up and shoved my free hand into a pocket. When I walked into the warm office, I almost turned around and walked back out. Edith Cullens stood at the desk in front of me. Impossible not to recognize her tangled blonde hair. She didn't seem to notice the sound of my entrance. I stood pressed against the back wall, waiting for the balding receptionist to be free. She was arguing with him in a low, velvety voice. I quickly picked up the gist of the argument. She was trying to trade from 6th-hour biology to another time. Any other time. This could not be about me. It had to be something else. Something that had happened before I got to the biology room. The look on her face must have been about some other problem. It was impossible that a stranger could take such a sudden, instant dislike to me. I wasn't interesting enough to be worth a strong reaction. The door opened again, and the cold wind suddenly gusted through the room, rustling the papers on the desk, waving through my hair. The girl who came in merely stepped into the desk, placed a note in the wire basket, and walked out again. But Edith Cullens' back stiffened, and she turned slowly to glare at me. Her face was ridiculously perfect, not even one tiny flaw to make her seem human, with piercing, hate-filled eyes. For an instant, I felt the oddest thrill of genuine fear raising the hair on my arms, as if she were going to pull a gun out and shoot me. The look lasted a second, but it was colder than the freezing wind. She turned back to the receptionist. "Never mind, then," she said quickly in a voice like silk. "I can see that it's impossible. Thank you so much for your help." And she turned on her heel without another look at me and disappeared out the door. I went robotically to the desk, my face white for once instead of red, and handed him the signed slip. "How did your first day go, son?" he asked. "Fine," I lied, my voice cracking. I could see I hadn't convinced him. When I got to the truck, it was almost the last car in the lot. It seemed like a haven, already the closest thing to home I had in this wet green hell. I sat inside for a while just staring out the windshield blankly, but soon I was cold enough to want the heater, so I turned the key and the engine roared to life. I headed back to Charlie's house, trying to think of nothing at all. And that is the end of chapter 1. I really hope you guys enjoyed, and definitely until next time, there'll be more. Please, of course, when you guys have a chance, check out my channel for other content, and please share. Share. The more you share, the more support, the more chapters. And until next time, I'll catch you later.